Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. As inflation grimly marches towards 3%, Donald Trump is hitting the road, calling the affordability crisis a, quote, Democrat con job, even as polls show it is hurting him with his own voters. Was back at it last week with new CPI numbers showing plunging inflation, but built on incomplete data collection during the shutdown and a bizarre housing lag. Meaning for now, inflation is still around 3% and going nowhere. So Trump's point with the con job line is it is Biden's affordability crisis, and that's true that inflation is running a lot lower than under Biden, with prediction market Kalshi now projecting full year 2025 inflation at 2.9% compared to near double digits at Biden's peak. The problem is voters were not hoping for prices to keep going up, but less than Biden, they were hoping for falling prices. In fact, that's what Trump promised during the campaign, including cutting electricity prices by half, cutting gas prices to $2, even promised that, quote, inflation will completely vanish. Now, I've talked about why this won't happen. For starters, the Fed will not allow falling prices because they are married to a Keynesian theory that says falling prices cause recessions when it's the Fed that causes recessions. But even setting aside the Fed, inflation has not fallen because Congress has not done the two things that could lower prices, cut spending and deregulate. In fact, Kalshi predicts spending will rise by $600 billion this year, delivering nearly $2 trillion of deficit. This means even more government dollars competing with private dollars to push prices up, while government deficits force the Fed to print money, so-called quantitative easing, which also drives up prices. Meanwhile, Congress has not deregulated, which could drop prices by 10 to 15% across the board. The big ones here would be environmental rules, healthcare, red tape on house construction, and farming. Note, none of these are Trump. Congress decides how much to spend and how much to regulate. Trump can only nibble at the edges, and even there, he is up against Obama judges who only Congress can bypass. So if Congress is not doing anything to lower prices, Trump should be telling that story instead of talking about con jobs and fake polls. Now, I understand Trump does not want to alienate Republicans in Congress. Maybe he learned from his first term when teasing John McCain cost him a repeal of Obamacare. The con job line is not playing with voters who can see their mortgage bills, electric bills, healthcare bills, and grocery receipts. In fact, a recent CBS poll found just 32% of voters approve of Trump on inflation, one of his weakest issues, which would mathematically include millions of Trump voters. So it's next, Trump's famous for pivoting fast when something is not working. Dismissing affordability as a con job is not working. Should embrace voter concerns and lay blame where it belongs on Congress. He can still frame it correctly as Democrats and their rhino allies if he needs to stay friends with Republican leadership, but denial is not a strategy. During Biden, left-wing media lectured Americans how inflation was all in their head. It didn't work then, and it's not working now. Working-class Americans and young Americans got an early Christmas present. With rental prices falling the most in 15 years, who knew deporting 2 million illegals would lower the rent? The numbers come from the Census Bureau, who reports the nationwide vacancy rate for rentals hit 7%. That's up almost half since 2022. In some Sunbelt cities, it's closer to 10 or 12%. This is bringing rental prices down to a nationwide median $1,367. That's down almost $100 since 22. What's driving it is two things: deportations, which have opened up over 1 million entry-level houses and apartments, along with a closed border that had been sucking up all the entry-level rentals. One study in Texas and Arizona found occupancy fell over 1% after stepped-up deportations, and since Trump took office, the national rental population shrank for the first time since 2009. Second, and more ominously, young Americans are moving back in with their parents at Great Depression levels, with over half of 18 to 29-year-olds now living with their parents, including 1 in 4 college grads. Of course, the two are connected. If illegals are hogging up the rentals, the price goes up and your kids cannot get a job. There's more to come as deportations continue while a slew of new rental units is coming online. According to the census, there's currently almost 1 million multifamily units under construction. That's about double the usual pace. On the ground, this is lowering rents, while landlords are boosting concessions like free rent and utilities. 1 in 3 rentals now include free months, which is triple the 2019 rate. They're even loosening income standards, so even part-time workers who number roughly 30 million Americans can find a place to live that is not mom's basement. Alas, landlords are only going so far because the harebrained COVID-era eviction moratorium that let renters stop paying rent, that was supposed to help the poor, but of course it backfired to where no sane landlord is renting to part-timers or students without a hefty risk premium on the rent, especially in moratorium-happy blue cities. So what's next? I've been hard on Congress for failing to cut spending or meaningfully deregulate, leaving inflation to pillage the American family. But deportations are picking up where Congress left off, with rents and used cars getting cheaper, while growth in blue-collar wages is hitting 65-year highs. Trump's doing what he can on rents. He's deporting as many illegals and grifters as Obama judges will allow. He's also restoring 100% write-offs for housing construction in the Big Beautiful Bill, which should keep that slew of construction units coming. Finally, of course, he's pushed the Fed to lower interest rates that build more housing today at the expense of inflation that won't happen for years. Congress has been AWOL on housing as it has been on everything else it touches or fails to touch, but deportations and construction are finally giving young Americans a break. Give it a couple years and we may not even have a national housing shortage. A word from our sponsor. If you own gold, and many of you do, you already understand how it protects your wealth from the insanity coming out of Washington. The inflation, the recessions, the wars. But with monetary metals, there's a way to actually earn a yield of up to 4% on your gold paid in more ounces of gold. You retain ownership of real, allocated physical gold with no storage costs while your ounces grow every month outside the banking system. If you're serious about protecting your future and building your legacy, head to monetarymetals.com/Peter to get started. Now back to our show. Science got an early Christmas present as a key climate catastrophe study was retracted after being widely hyped for a year. Turns out it was fake. Which is not surprising if you've been following the 50-year carbon dioxide hoax. The study ran last year in Nature, which used to be one of the top scientific journals in the world. It claimed global warming, or climate change, would cost $38 trillion a year by 2049 and would shrink global output by 2/3 by the end of the century, with a catastrophic 40% drop in crop yields. In other words, we would all be starving again. The paper made worldwide headlines. The standard blurb was, quote, "Bombshell report predicts catastrophe," accompanied by a random photo of houses burning, not a joke. It quickly became one of the most cited papers on Earth and is already baked into at least 168 other scientific papers. It was cited by the OECD, World Bank, central banks around the world to determine monetary policy getting ready for the Great Collapse. Now, the crop crash alone should have laughed it out of the room, since it's well known that carbon dioxide and heat raise crop yields. Commercial greenhouses, for example, pump in CO2 at 2 to 3 times atmospheric levels and are intentionally built in hot places like the Negev Desert. Alas, it was not laughed out of the room because climate doom porn pays the bills for an army of activists and universities. Still, the numbers were extreme enough to invite scrutiny, and it turns out the data was corrupted by a single data point from Uzbekistan, which was hot for a while when the Soviet Union collapsed, suggesting maybe climate models are not as sophisticated as one might think. Indeed, embarrassing data is par for the course in climate science. In the 1970s, scientists warned of a coming ice age. They predicted marine life extinction by 1980, and Life magazine predicted water rationing by 1974. Food rationing was supposed to come by 1980 with 100 million starved. Back then it was the Ice Age doing the starving. The Smithsonian predicted 75% of species would go extinct by 1995. The Club of Rome said we'd run out of fossil fuels by 1992. In fact, the UN warned entire nations would be wiped off the map, sunk into the ocean, including Britain, which would sink by the year 2000. Humanity itself was supposed to be extinct by 2023. Yes, we are living on borrowed time. Why do they keep it up? Because that's where the money's at. Between 1993 and 2017 alone, federal funding for climate change came to $154 billion. It's since accelerated to close to $500 billion in total, which buys a lot of professors. Toss in trillions of green energy gigaws to double your electric bill, and there's plenty of money to pay academics to invent fairy tales. So as an expert, even if global warming is real, it's not worth the trillions to fix it. May actually be a good thing. Millions of acres of Canada and Russia to farm, a golden age of biological diversity, considering plants like it warm, ask the rainforest. They certainly love CO2. It's what plants crave. Meanwhile, in the real world, cold kills 20 times more than heat, while the few heat deaths we do have, such as the hundreds who die in Europe every year, are specifically because Greens effectively ban air conditioning in Europe, or trying to ban economic growth in the rest of the world. The American economy is on fire, with GDP growth coming in a blockbuster 4.3%, up from last quarter's already impressive 3.8%. In nominal raw dollars, that was almost 8% annualized growth. The number blew away estimates. Bank of America called it, quote, very, very impressive. In fact, it's one of the best growth rates in 25 years. Nice to find under the tree. And so much for the Trump wipeout our corrupt media and government-funded economics professors were peddling. Meanwhile, recession odds crashed, going from 50-50 odds of a recession under Biden in 2025, as in this year, to just 1 in 4 odds now through 2027. Now, considering the Federal Reserve engineers recessions for a living, 1 in 4 odds is about as good as it gets with a central bank. Growth was strong across the board. Consumer spending, which is 2/3 of GDP and which media has been doom-porning all year, jumped 3.5%. That's up from a strong 2.5% last quarter. Fixed investments, meaning new factories, machinery, and, of course, AI data centers, was almost as good, up an annualized 2.8%. Exports jumped a blistering 9% annualized, while imports actually fell 5% annualized, as in tariffs are doing exactly what Trump promised. To be fair, federal spending did boost GDP, as it has since Nixon replaced the gold standard with trillion-dollar blank checks for Congress. Still, federal spending now accounts for less than 1/10 of GDP growth, compared to almost half under Biden. What's most impressive is there's about a half dozen reasons why GDP should be hurting right now, starting with the slower federal spending, along with 300,000 federal layoffs and 2 million deportations, voluntary or otherwise. These get rid of millions of parasites, but they also mechanically reduce GDP because, surprisingly, government statisticians naturally count government paychecks and government handouts as GDP. And then you've got the Fed strangling the economy with some of the highest interest rates since the 2008 crisis, and the government shutdown, which was looming at the end of Q3, and would have reduced spending by millions of government workers and the government contractors who strip our fair republic. So 4.3 with all that is downright impressive. Now, I've been predicting strong growth all year, and it could actually accelerate into 2026 for 3 big reasons. 1, a Federal Reserve that's now solidly inflationary. 2, ongoing AI build-out. And 3, the trillions that Trump has strong-armed with tariffs, including companies producing in America under the big, beautiful tariff umbrella, as well as trillions of forced investments in trade deals with countries like Japan, Korea, and Europe. Now, it takes a long time to stand up new factories, so we haven't even begun to see the GDP boost coming from all that. So as next, GDP feels abstract to most Americans. What they care about is the jobs and wages that come from GDP. In a recent video, I mentioned how outside federal workers Jobs for Americans are going gangbusters at an annual pace of 1.8 million, so about 150,000 a month, with blue-collar wage growth at a 65-year high. In fact, the entire weak jobs narrative peddled by media has been federal workers and illegals. A 2026 GDP boom will accelerate both jobs and wages, which we will need if the green shoots of AI job replacement moves from its current target of college grads with useless degrees into the mainstream of American workers. A word from our sponsor. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is Kite, maker of the famous Block Clock. Kite devices are made in Canada and they're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's COINKITE.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. America is on the edge of a debt crisis, according to the Wall Street Journal. Will the dollar save us, or will the mighty dollar make it worse? Last week, the Wall Street Journal warned, quote, all that stands between the U.S. and debt market freakout is the dollar's reserve currency status, adding darkly, it's not the unbreakable shield many assume. So the problem is not only is dollar dominance a breakable shield, when it does break, the dollar's reserve currency status makes it much worse. So reserve currency status is where your currency is the main one used in the world. For a long time, it was the British pound, and before that, it was the Spanish, Dutch, and the hard money city-state of Florence, Italy. But since World War II, the undisputed reserve currency is the U.S. dollar. This is cool because it means you can print mountains of green paper and trade them for toasters and fidget spinners. So we get cool stuff, they get paper. It is, as one grumpy French foreign minister called it, an exorbitant privilege. And it protects you because even if you're printing mountains of green paper, foreigners dutifully soak them up. They save them in vaults where they don't leak out into inflation. So it looks like a free lunch. Print paper, foreigners absorb the inflation. But here's the problem. Think of all the dollars in the world like a giant reservoir with rivers of freshly printed dollars pouring in. Some from the Fed, some from Wall Street banks, lending dollars into existence with fractional reserve. So the reservoir doesn't overflow with inflation because foreigners are siphoning dollars out the other end and then sitting on them. But what happens if you print too much? Say, if you're running permanent $2 trillion deficits. Easy, foreigners stop seeing dollars as safe places to park their savings and they dump them. These siphons reverse. Now you've got rivers of new money pouring in and siphons returning all those overseas dollars. So reserve currency status hides the pain, it delays the crisis, but it means when the crisis hits, it is catastrophic. And the longer it's been going, the more catastrophic, and we've been at this for 81 years now. So how much money are we talking about? Hilariously, nobody knows how many dollars exist. The Fed tried counting a couple years ago and gave up. We have a general sense how many dollars in the U.S., which is about 22 trillion in M2 money supply. But overseas dollars, the ones that would come flooding back, estimates run up to 15 trillion or more. So if the dollar loses its hard money privilege, all those dollars start flooding back, which would nearly double domestic prices as they water down dollars already circulating in the U.S. So what's next? The one thing saving the dollar is as bad as the Fed is on inflation, everybody else is worse. The European and Japanese economies are sustained by stimulus. China's currency isn't even freely traded, and the BRICS currency went from gold-backed Goliath to currency basket joke. So the dollar remains the cleanest dirty shirt for now. Now, actual gold is nibbling at the edges. In fact, the yellow metal just passed the dollar in sovereign holdings. If that accelerates, which it is, and foreigners dump their dollars, 81 years of reserve currency status will destroy us like it has every failed empire. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersaintange.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.